Greetings, everyone. We're going to talk about the endocrine system, and I'm going to break this up into 3 videos. So this video will kind of be an overview of the hormones, how they work, and then we'll talk a little bit about endocrine structures, and then hormones, and then in the third video, I'm going to talk to you guys very specifically about insulin and glucagon and how those particular hormones work. So let's start out with just talking a little bit about hormones, um, glands, and what that means. So when we talk about hormones, so hormones, and the idea here is just to give you guys a base of this. So hormones are chemical signals in the body. Now they're different than the kinds of signals we've talked about in the past, such as neurotransmitters. These types of signals travel through the body from one organ to a different tissue. They travel very long distances. And they come from glands. So a gland is any kind of structure that produces a secretion in the body. Now we're going to be talking about glands that are endocrine glands. And this is really important, so start in your notes. Endocrine glands are glands that secrete products into the blood. So in the endocrine system, when we talk about a gland, the hormone goes into the blood. You also have exocrine glands, and we're going to talk about those when we do the integument. Exocrine glands secrete products through a tube, and this would be an example of that is your sweat glands. Other glands in the endocrine system also have exocrine function. For example, your pancreas secretes digestive enzymes through a tube, so it's an exocrine gland. But it also secretes hormones into the blood, so it's also an endocrine gland. Now, when we talk about target cell, so target cell here on this slide, a target cell is whatever that hormone, whatever cell or tissue that hormone is going to activate. So it activates the cell through that hormone pathway. That's what the target cell is. So we actually have 2 kinds of hormones. And we talked about, this is a callback, we talked about chemistry. We have steroid-based hormones, and steroids are lipids. And then we have protein-based hormones that are made of amino acids, and they work really differently. Remember, steroids are hydrophobic, so they go right through the phospholipid bilayer on the cell membrane. So the receptors for those are inside the cell. Protein-based hormones generally are hydrophilic. They don't pass through the cell membrane, so the receptors for those are on the outside of the cell, and that's a really important difference here. So when we talk about these kinds of hormones, right, we talk about steroid hormones, for example, and so a lot of times when you think of hormones, and if you watched the videos that I posted on YouTube, they talk a lot about testosterone and estrogen. Those are steroid-based hormones, and those things actually enter into the cell. They attach to protein receptors, and those protein receptors activate genes inside the cell. Now, the structures that we're going to talk about in the system here are these. So this diagram is really nice. It has all of the organs on them in the endocrine system. Now, some of these structures aren't part of the endocrine system directly. They do have endocrine function, but they're not considered part of the endocrine system. So we're going to talk about these glands. So we've already talked about the hypothalamus in the brain. The pituitary. Now, the pituitary is great because if you guys ever have to guess on a test where hormone comes from, always guess the pituitary. It makes so many things. Those 2 structures in the brain, remember, are linked together by the infundibulum. And so they kind of work together. The pituitary gland basically helps run everything else. Now, up here in the neck region, right here in your cervical region, you have 2 glands. You have the thyroid gland, and on the posterior side of that, you have the parathyroid gland. Down here in the abdomen, you have the adrenal glands that sit on top of the kidneys. You also have the pancreas, which is really important, and we'll spend some more time on that. And then also in the brain, and I missed that because it's over here, is the pineal gland, and we talked a little bit about that. So those are the structures that we're going to be dealing with. Now, there are other organs that have endocrine function. So, for example, the heart releases hormones. Your adipose tissue, your fat, releases hormones. It releases a hormone called leptin. And when you eat, your adipose tissue releases that hormone, and that basically helps turn off your appetite. Your digestive tract also helps regulate appetite and hunger by releasing hormones when your stomach is full or when it's empty. And then the kidneys also produce hormones that regulate things like blood, the amount of red blood cells that you have. And then, of course, the gonads, you ovaries and testes, they make androgens or sex hormones. So I just wanted to show you this really quickly because we're going to talk about very specific hormones and their activity on their target cells. And a lot of times that's kind of what students walk away with when I talk about this. But I did want you to sort of realize that the endocrine system is actually very complex. So if you look at the hypothalamus was sort of the control region for the autonomic nervous system, and it's the control region also for your endocrine system. Your hypothalamus releases hormones that stimulate other glands. So for example, the hypothalamus can release a hormone called thyroid releasing hormone, or TRH. That then activates the pituitary gland, which releases a thyroid stimulating hormone. And then that thyroid stimulating hormone causes the thyroid gland to release hormone. And so the target cells for that hormone are all of the cells in the body. So if you have a patient that has hypothyroidism, they don't produce enough, it could be a problem with the thyroid, it could be a problem with pituitary, it could be a problem with the hypothalamus. If you have a patient that's hyperthyroidism, they produce too much, same thing. So it's not always easy to diagnose some of these issues with the endocrine system. So, and we have this pathway, there's lots of different releasing hormones. I'm not going to actually hold you to memorizing these releasing hormones. We're going to talk more about the individual hormones next.